Welcome everyone to day 44 at the Utah Senate. This is our time to answer questions from the public who are watching us over the internet and from our media representatives. And we welcome you all here today. And we look forward to seeing you tomorrow, but we'll be glad we don't see you on Friday.
Or vice versa.
And I'm sure the public out there will be glad that we're out of session and not disrupting their lives. But this is a 45-day opportunity of free speech, and we're grateful that we have that in the Constitution, and we have this time to enact public policy. But we're glad that it's short, and we're only disrupting your life for that 45-day period, and the rest of the year we can just live our lives. We welcome questions from those who are watching, and right now we'll just go ahead and take questions from the media.
There were a couple of SB 54 related bills passed over in the House that are headed your way. The McKell bill that seeks to resolve the issue created by the SCC decision.
Okay.
And then also the McKay bill that there's a substitute that would repeal SB 54 if the Count My Vote initiative on the ballot, or heading for the ballot, doesn't pass. What do you think of those two bills, and what do you think will happen? Especially, let's start with the one that would repeal SB 54.
I'm going to defer to our majority leader, Senator Van Tassel. He's our caucus leader, and we've had a little bit of a caucus decision or discussion, but not much on this.
Very little, and we'll probably pick that up today.
Okay.
Or tomorrow. We got a full agenda for today on bills that have fiscal impacts, and we'll be working with those, trying to get to a consensus. Several are going to come along. We have spoken briefly about a couple of the bills, and I think we're looking at McKell's bill fairly strongly, and we'll review them on the merits and see where we end up. I mean, it's an answer I don't know for sure.
Well, what about personally? I mean, how do you feel about a bill repealing a law that was a compromise the lawmakers supported if a citizen's initiative doesn't pass?
Well, I don't know if I want to put my personal opinions out there. Especially where I'm trying to speak for the caucus. So,
Yeah.
Well, I'm interested in what majority leadership thinks of that. Would someone want to weigh in on that concept?
I mean, we have our personal opinions about it, probably, obviously, and some of us were part of that negotiation a couple of years ago, and we feel pretty strongly about not breaking that, but there's also the argument that part of that agreement was there'd be no initiative, and they went ahead with the initiative. So that's actually probably a breach of the agreement a couple of years ago. And I mentioned that to Count My Vote folks. I felt like what they were doing, we had upheld our side of the bargain, and that they're not upholding their side of the bargain by going to the ballot. And I think they were sympathetic to that, and so I think the final version of their initiative was toned down some, and just addressing some of the things that we've had before the legislature but couldn't get the House and the Senate to agree to it. I mean, so those are the arguments that are out there. And I think that's the discussion that we'll have in caucus at some point, either today or tomorrow.
I mean, there are other bills that would delay the impact of initiatives, or another bill over in the House that would delay the effective date, I guess, of initiatives, or the implementation of initiatives. Why would the legislature need to preemptively take action? I mean, if Count My Vote would fail, wouldn't that just open the door to consider making changes to the law passed under the, or the SB 54 compromise.
So
Are
let me ask you a question. Are you shifting gears to another bill?
No, I'm just saying there's, I'm trying to keep all these sorted in my mind, and it's kind of a cluttered place right now.
Well, welcome to the welcome to the legislature.
But I'm just wondering about the.
We're swimming in those issues also.
Yeah.
There's a few
Trying to
of them.
sort through.
There's a few of them here.
Yeah, just the preemptive nature of that McKay bill.
His is the preemptive nature?
Well,
bill?
his is the one that would repeal SB 54
Oh.
if the.
I thought that was
That's
McKay's.
McKay's, sorry. Back to the cluttered
You're
part.
making me swim more.
Slosh, I think is the word.
Yes.
I'm sorry, the bill that would preemptively repeal SB 54.
McKay's bill.
Yes.
Again, I can't speak for the caucus, but historically, we have not been in favor of that as a Senate.
Okay.
So,
But that may have changed by now. We haven't taken that temperature yet.
so I think we all have to think about if the Count My Vote initiative passes, wouldn't it be hard for us to repeal SB 54 if the people have spoken? I don't know. It'd be hard if it passes.
That's a good question too, but those are all the questions we're grappling with on that whole issue.
And if it doesn't pass, it may be hard not to repeal it when the people speak. And so those are things we'll be trying to think through. So it's trying to predict the future is really hard, but that we'll do our best.
Senator Davis, so we had caucus discussions on this?
We're not.
You just love that we're kind of having a lot of infighting, right?
Well, I mean, fighting doesn't hurt. We've done our share over the years. But I think, do we let the people speak and then take an action after they've spoke? I mean, I don't know where the temperature is on this whole issue. And I think for us to be doing preemptive things is trying to second guess the public.
Hasn't got a dollar sign in front of it, I don't want.
Senator Stevenson says if it doesn't have a dollar sign in front of it, he doesn't want to answer it.
But because you feel like the SB 54 deal was kind of breached in the years since, are you reluctant to strike another deal on a different ballot initiative on the Our Schools Now?
Well, our schools now, well, that's a different issue. They're completely different.
Right, but the agreement would be to pull a ballot initiative again.
Yeah, but then, so we're working on that because Count My Vote people are coming to the table and wanting to talk, and we want to talk to try and avoid an initiative. And it isn't us forcing an issue. There's two willing parties trying to negotiate something that would avoid a ballot initiative and get the legislature to do something maybe they otherwise wouldn't do.
You mean Our Schools Now?
That's Our Schools Now.
Okay, you said Count My Vote.
But
Yeah.
Count My Vote was the
Yeah, well,
same. Count My Vote was the same,
I won't
had the
blame
same
him.
willingness, and lawmakers had the same willingness on SB 54. The argument that Michelle brings up is what I'm hearing.
I don't see it
people
the same
say
way
here.
because we did have that discussion because we ended up with willing parties. What was it, 3 years ago? We came to an agreement on that, and there was motivation from both sides. Their new ballot initiative was something they went ahead and did, even though we had kept our end of the bargain. They had gone ahead with the initiative, but I think their justification for it, and I think it may be a very good argument, is that there were elements that we didn't address in SB 54 years ago that we discovered along the way that the House and the Senate could never come to an agreement on, and so we didn't pass anything. And so their initiative keeps the substance and the structure of SB 54, but tries to answer some of those questions that we have been unable to answer as to moving the date to sign up for the election. Shouldn't it be at the same time we declare that you're going to collect signatures? You know, those are some of the bills that was one of the questions that we addressed in at least a Senate bill. Tried to negotiate with the House over the years on some of those questions. They sent bills back to us. We've tried to negotiate and just haven't been able to come to agreement. So, I mean, we just need to be fair about the questions that we're at. I felt initially that they went and were going to do a ballot initiative. I felt like that was a breach of, and we've kept our end of the bargain. But there are some unanswered questions that we haven't been able to address. And so I think that's a fair question also.
Is that a shift from a couple of days or not too much more than a week ago when Senator Bramble was here talking about the dual path and you endorsed his view, which was that we respect the rule of law. In the party, we respect the rule of law. Mm-hmm. Does this constitute a shift in your thinking now?
No, I mean, we're the ones that are making the policy, or the people are through an initiative, and so I guess I maybe don't quite understand the question, but my impression of what you're asking is, why don't you restate it?
Well, we had discussed the idea that party regulars and those were dissatisfied with SB 54, and that's why everything is gone to further action on it. And what I had learned from what you had said before was that the party was emphasizing the rule of law here. And since we're talking about a supermajority, I was figuring that was that this may constitute a shift of thinking and leadership or other positions here.
We tried to put a legislative fix on a situation to bring two parties together and try to get something to happen. We did that. There are always those in negotiation that will leave that negotiation and go out to do what they want to do anyway. And we have no control as a legislator over that. So it's really, the parties never came together. The legislature did with the discussions that went on in 54. That's my understanding in supporting that bill. Now you've got different players that are playing playing the political game, the partisan game. And they've got different ideas of where they want to go now in leading it. And of course, we're up here, we're changing legislation all the time. So, I mean, did we overreach in 54 and sort of allowed it to be decided in the general public? Or did we do a good job in trying to find good public policy going forward?
So I just wanted to just restate, hopefully just for some clarity for you, and I'm just going to try and restate what I said before, is there was an initiative several years ago. We came to an agreement with the parties, and we felt like that was an agreement that we had made. And there were bills constantly trying to undo what we agreed to. But we were defending, at least there was some, I was one of those trying to defend what agreement that we had made. Not everybody had made it individually, right? So we got 104 legislators. And then this year again, well, we've tried to modify it over the last couple of years to try and make it a better law, SB 54. We've not been able to come to an agreement with the House and the Senate. Our Count My Vote have said that they were going to put the ballot initiative on. Their initial effort was to just do away with the caucus system again. But there was many of us who were complaining that was a breach of the. We've lived up to our end of the bargain with Count My Vote, and I think that they went back and thought that, well, let's just clarify what the Senate and the House have been unable to do, and that's why they went on the ballot. So there's an argument from the legislature that says, we've kept our end of the bargain, why are you doing an initiative? But then there's the other question on their side is that, well, there was some things you needed to fix, but you haven't been able to fix, and that's what we're doing in this initiative. So I don't know, that's really, I think those are the questions, that's the layout of what the issue is in this whole election issue process.
What about the Our Schools Now deal? I understand the pair of bills that would facilitate that ballot question are for a hearing this afternoon in the House. Has the Senate talked any more about that, Senate majority, or?
We're, depending on how the schedule goes, we'll either talk about it today or tomorrow.
We've talked about it before without the gas tax question. Okay, so there was favor in our caucus, or at least we thought, but that's been weeks ago. And we're just waiting for the House to send something over so that then we can noodle over that in a caucus and figure out where the Senate is. But I'm pretty sure we're going to be at least with the tax reform, because that's been a favor of ours all along.
You're talking about the freeze?
Yeah. Well, the reducing of the income tax rate, the single sales factor, and of course, anytime we do with an increase like the property tax, it's a hard lift. But if we're doing them all together, I think there's some favor for it. But the negotiation, I would defer to Senator Adams.
Yeah, I think we had pretty much agreement on the items you talked about. The issue is the gas tax, and I think we talked yesterday about it being better policy. And I'll maybe just repeat that in the 1990s, we had 100% of the new capacity and maintenance and transportation being paid for out of the transportation fund. Now we've got, it started at $90 million for Centennial Highway, now it's $600 million. And I think most tax people, most people agree that you ought to tax according to a user fee, and there's an argument that perhaps the general fund is somewhat of a user fee, but surely gas tax is a direct user fee. So when we're trying to lower the income tax rate to 4.95 and be able to maintain what we believe is a really important economic indicator, and that's low income tax in a state, the initiative is trying to raise that income tax. And so if we can substitute what would be a user fee, a gas tax, that may not have as much economic effect for the income tax, probably better tax policy. But the problem is I just don't know if we have support in our caucus with all the gas tax increases that we've done for a 10-cent gas tax. And that's probably the question of where we're sticking right now. That'd be my guess.
And that 10 cent
that's
increase would be entirely for schools?
It'd be, so it's 10-cent increase. It would not be done by the legislature. It would be done by initiative on the ballot, so the people would decide.
Well,
That's non-binding.
it's not
And
binding.
it's not binding, yeah, so it's not binding.
We have to act.
But they
Referendum.
do a referendum, and then we would have to act next session. But we'd probably follow their direction, and, then that money that's part of that 600 million, it's about 140 million that the 10-cent gas tax would raise. We'd shift 140 of the 600 back into the general fund for education and let that gas tax backfill it. So there'd be no change to transportation, but there'd be 140 million more new dollars for education.
You'd shift all of the 140 million to
Yes.
education?
Yes.
And the 10 cent increase generates 600 million or 140 million?
It's 104, it's really 100, I think 70, 80 or somewhere around there, but 30% of it's B&C money for locals. So the locals would receive a 30 million or some odd, maybe 40 million increase for the B&C. But the state portion is around 140.
Essentially what is happening with that is you would reverse what we've done over the last 20 years.
Yes.
Take a big step backwards. Instead of funneling money now from education to transportation, we would now funnel money from transportation, not diminishing what we're paying for transportation, because we'd hold them harmless. You're increasing the gas tax, increased revenue. That revenue increase then would be funneled back to education.
So,
How would that work?
And
Would
the-
that be like an earmark?
No, it's,
reduce the earmark.
it's releasing an earmark.
There's a percentage of that sales tax that now goes to transportation. We would move that off if the gasoline tax went up. We wouldn't use that
So
money.
from 600
That goes back
million
into
to
general fund money.
500, or there's math in
And
there.
that's built into statute.
460,
Thank
And
you.
okay?
the real question I have is binding the hands of future legislators. With the general fund is general fund money. And I don't know how we commit to dedicate
Well, that
that
was my
forever.
question about earmark.
Though we are, in our income tax, we're committed to going to, that all goes to education. So there's some real issues in here, long term in my mind, of where we're headed on, and I know the negotiations, we haven't been at the table with that negotiation. And so we're going to brief ourselves on that as soon as our caucus gets going.
Is that property tax freeze in the bill right now, or would that be next year?
Representative Last and Senator Fillmore have been working on that. It's basically part of the equalization effort, and they worked on it last year. I think Senator Fillmore had a similar bill like that last year, and it was one of the few bills that did get heard on the House calendar. And so I think Representative Last has
Do we have any questions?
the portion of it. So,
All right, we'll take another question.
Can I just ask about the transportation bill that's coming over from the House, the task force transportation bill? All of the SB 136, it's the one that overhauls UTA, they've made some changes there, but they had in committee in the House stripped out all the new revenue sources except for the electric and hybrid vehicles. I'm hearing that the Senate doesn't want to go forward with this if you can't have some kind of revenue sources.
Well, we think that this is such an important bill. It's really an education bill. If you want to think of in terms that if we can relieve the pressure on infrastructure, that means that we'll have less, there will be less pressure to spend education money on infrastructure in the future like we've done over the last 20 years. And so that's the reason why we felt like this was an important bill going forward, because you're not going to be able to keep up on road funding. We've just used our best effort over the last couple decades, and we've got more congestion than we've ever had before. So everybody's realizing that transit has to be a bigger part of this. That's why we had this transportation bill to create the transit TIF fund that we could give as matching grants to locals who put forth the effort, who also do land use that's conducive with transit, putting workforce, workplace, recreation, and entertainment around those corridors. That you will spend less money on infrastructure as a whole if you do that and concentrate that. So that was the purpose of the bill. Yes, some of that was taken out, and we're working on, putting some of that stuff back in right now. And so we're working with the House on some kind of a compromise between the two efforts.
What would the revenue source look like? Because there was a lot of change over on this side about what that would look like. It was this hotel and
It won't be
car
that,
tax.
I can tell you it
It was a
won't.
sales tax.
It's none of
It
that.
was a vehicle registration fee.
No.
So what else is left?
Well,
More
part of the
gas.
problem is this ballot question that we're going to be putting on I'm not sure we're putting it on the ballot. We got to get the votes, right? Part of the problem is that because it's difficult now, it was difficult enough for us to fund that bill and now put a 10% gas tax question on the ballot. That's the difficulty. If we weren't doing that, I think there's a real possibility that we could get a more robust funding source like the registration fee for SB 36. But since the House is not going to do that, I think that we'll try and find some money to at least get it started, but I think it might be internal budgets, internal revenue that we already have, doing a shift here, a shift there, at least get it started and get the policy and structure in place, and then come back and, in a future legislature and fund it more. But what we feel very strongly about is that we increase the local options for transit, because we're going to need all that we have and much, much more in the future in order to meet all the demands for transit.
And the changes to UTA are,
Those would remain the same.
they added a couple last night in the House, making the Attorney General legal counsel for UTA. And then there's an issue now over how much it's going to cost for changing the name. UTA is saying it's a $50 million price tag.
We haven't had those conversations with the House.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right,
We need to get to 5.
thanks a bunch.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll see y'all tomorrow.